Hey Optimancers, Chris here. So, something a little different with my build today. So, here's what happened. I was contacted with this message. Hey Treant Monk, I run the Twisted Tentacle in YouTube channel, and I'm a big fan of your channel. I would like to see if you're interested in doing a collaboration of sorts for a character build challenge. So I asked for the details, and this is what I was told. D&D Daily started a challenge where either a viewer or one of us comes up with a one-sentence concept for a character, and we each build a 5e character based on the concept. Then we put out a video and drop it simultaneously talking about the challenge and our build. So that sounded interesting, and I particularly enjoy optimizing concept builds, so I was sent a list of possible concepts. This is what they were. First, a character who can feed their strengths, physical or mental, by being exposed to the elements. A character who uses madness as a weapon. A herbalist who has discovered strange plants and fungi. A cursed individual who inflicts rot on people if he's not careful. A character who specializes in slaying mage slayers. A character who wields power from the heavens and the hells. And a Dr. Frankenstein reanimator type. So, reading those, the first one I had an idea for was the herbalist, who discovered strange plants and fungi. Because when I read that, I immediately connected that to this. And this. And this. Now, that sounded like an interesting concept I haven't tackled up to now. So that's what I went for. How would I turn the concept of a herbalist who discovers some magic, quote-unquote, plants and fungi be turned into an optimized build? Well, let's start at the beginning. In the hole in the ground lived a hobbit. Whoops, wrong story. But I do know hobbits like smoking that pipeweed, so I do think that's a good starting point. Here's a picture of our young hobbit, good old Chommy Tong. Hi, if you're enjoying this video and you'd be interested in supporting content on this channel, please do so by clicking the link to my Patreon page in the video description. If you were a patron, you would have already seen this video and without the YouTube ads. Also, depending on your level of support, you might be part of my exclusive Discord community, or you might get a video call out just like this. Thank you so much to Douglas Reynolds, Drew Terry, Eric Wasserman, FBK05, Gishlife, Gakumaru, Hendry, Hoerby, Ian Johnson, Jay Gemmel, James Makla, James Sprague, James Thomas, Jeff Williams, Jadzan, John Matera, Jonathan Lexi, Joseph Robideau, Joseph Van Horn, Justin Times, and K. Che Aurelio. Thank you all so much for your support. Let's get started. So, we're starting with our racial pick, and we're going with a halfling, specifically the stout halfling. By the way, if you use setting specific material, I think a Loxodon halfling from Wildmount would fit pretty well too, but here's what we get. First, halflings are small-sized, and they have an unfortunate 25-foot movement speed. However, we also get my favorite racial feature in the game, and that is lucky. This allows us to re-roll any natural ones for ability checks, saving throws, and attack rolls. Getting a natural one, and then getting to re-roll it every time, is just one of those things in the game that gives me immense joy every time it happens. Next, we're going to get Brave. This gives us advantage on saving throws against being frightened, and unfortunately, in this case, this is eventually going to be redundant. Nothing we can really do about that. Then we're going to have Halfling Nimbleness. This allows us to move through the space of even enemy creatures that are medium-sized or larger. And finally, as a Stout Halfling, we get advantage on saving throws against poison and resistance to poison damage. I figure this is probably an appropriate feature if we're eating a bunch of strange plants and fungi. For ability scores, I use the Tash's feature to move around our ability score bonuses, and I moved the +2 Dexterity to Charisma, but I kept the +1 Constitution. Alright, now we're going to go on to the background. Now, you could make a custom background if you like, but we definitely want proficiency with a herbalism kit if we're a herbalist. And if we're wandering the woods searching for unusual plants and fungi, I think Hermit works just fine. We pick up our herbalism kit proficiency, and we'll start with one, and we'll get medicine and religion proficiency. So we're starting with an 8 strength, 14 dexterity, 13 constitution, 9 intelligence, 13 wisdom, and 15 charisma. However, remember we have a +2 to charisma and a +1 to constitution, so our starting constitution is actually 14, and our starting charisma is actually 17. Okay, so I am going to reluctantly break one of my self-imposed rules here, because my starting class and subclass, it's too obvious. I cannot resist. So, Chami Tong is a hippie type. Free love and peace and all that jazz. Here's where my internal conflict started, because what class and subclass would a hippie be? Yeah, a peace cleric. This is a subclass I promised myself not to use in builds. If you watch this channel, you know I am not a fan of the design of the peace cleric at all. Not that it isn't powerful, quite the opposite, but I am going to break down here and start with Peace Cleric because that's what Chami Tong would be. Mechanically, this is a powerhouse 1-level dip. We get medium armor and shield proficiency, so we'll want to pick up scale mail armor and shield and upgrade to half plate whenever we can. This means we'll start with a solid 18 armor class, increasing to 19 when we get half plate. Heroism and Sanctuary are our domain spells. Heroism is a decent way to get fear immunity and some temporary hit points, but Sanctuary we probably won't use. It's a good spell, but not for us, because with a 13 Wisdom, our saving throw DC just isn't very good. We're going to pick up History and Insight as class proficiencies, and then we get Persuasion as a bonus skill proficiency through Peace Cleric. Alright, and then Emboldening Bond. So this feature is really powerful, and it's going to scale with our level, even if we leave Peace Cleric, and it is powerful right to level 20. This feature scales off our proficiency bonus alone, and it scales regardless of our class mix, and it actually scales in 2 ways. First, the number of creatures we can affect is equal to our proficiency bonus, and second, we get a number of uses equal to our proficiency bonus. So in both cases, they start at 2, and they will eventually be as high as 6. This feature lasts for 10 minutes, it doesn't use concentration, and it allows everyone bonded to add a d4 to an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw on any turn, as long as they remain within 30 feet of one other of creature that is bonded. So yeah, this is a really powerful feature, and I personally don't enjoy the way it interrupts the flow of play, but it's good. It's really, really good. Then we pick some spells. So starting with cantrip, we pick up Guidance, of course. This is a d4, and yes, it stacks with Emboldening Bond on ability checks. Next, we'll grab Light. Remember, as halflings don't have dark visions, spells like Light are pretty useful. And I figure we'll grab Spare the Dying as well, so we have a quick way to stabilize a dying creature without expending spell slots. Then we will grab Bless, and yes, this also stacks with Emboldening Bond, and it is a strong use of our first action in combat, and a good use of our concentration. And it, stays pretty good pretty much forever. Healing Word will be our other selection. Bonus action healing is always handy to have. And then if we do expend a spell slot, we can bring a down character back up into the action.
Peace and love. Peace and love.
But our character is wandering through the wilderness, and they find some quote-unquote strange plants and fungi. And they're very interested in those. They do some experimentation, then some more, and decides, yeah, Chami Tong really, really likes this stuff. And we are going to represent this altered state of mind with our multi-class, as we take our first level of Sorcerer, subclass, Aberrant Mind. Now, concept aside, I've been wanting to do an Aberrant Mind Sorcerer build on this channel. I mean, ever since Tasha's was released. And up to now, I just hadn't gotten around to it. But with this concept, it was perfect. And frankly, if I wasn't restricting myself by concept, I think honestly, our most powerful option would have been to grab Sorcerer at level 1. Then you go back to that Peace Cleric dip at 2, and then go back to Sorcerer at level 3. Because then we would get the biggest hit from the Sleep spell, because at level 1, it's just really, really good. And we would have Constitution saving throw proficiency, which would help protect our concentration. As it is, though, I think we're fine sticking with the concept, but it does mean we'll probably want to fit Resilient Constitution onto the build at some point. I'm going to take this build to level 13, by the way. That's probably going to cover you for an entire campaign. But if you want a higher level version, I would just stick with Sorcerer. Get more sorcery points, the Wish spell, all the good stuff. So the idea of this character is they partake in these strange plants and fungi, and those result in Chami Tong having an altered state of mind. In other words, he's tripping, but he is magically tripping, allowing him to alter the states of minds of others as well through psionic-like abilities. We're also smoking up a storm, and I think there's a couple spells that are pretty obvious that can be represented with our Doobie Doobie Doo. I normally don't bother with Stinking Cloud. This character will have Stinking Cloud. It was an imperative. And that gives me an opportunity to talk about how to make the use of some spells that I normally don't take. And Stinking Cloud is a spell I think it's worth talking about because it is one of those spells that can be good, but you need to use it right. Or the enemies can just walk out of it if they're not immune in the first place. We want to cast Stinking Cloud with this character because this is Chami Tong. But we also want to be optimal because this is Treant Monk's Temple. And we can do both. We're going to start by going through the class and subclass features though, and then we'll move on to spells. Also, keep in mind that since our first level was in Cleric, we're adding our levels together for the purpose of determining spell slots, so some upcasting is definitely on the menu. Okay, so hit points. Let's talk about what is probably a weaker point. I mean, our hit points will be okay, but not great. We have D6 plus 2 from Constitution. That's basically the lowest amount of hit points I would consider acceptable. Now let's go on to a really strong point. So definitely the best feature of this subclass is Psionic Spells. Sorcerers are super hungry for knowing spells. There's 2 subclasses that solve that problem: Aberrant Mind and Clockwork Soul. And in our case, here's the list of additional spells known, and whenever we gain a level, we can switch any of these for any spell of enchantment or divination schools available to sorcerers, wizards, or warlocks. And yeah, we'll be switching out most of these. Here's what we're going to be keeping. So we'll keep the Mind Sliver cantrip. Honestly, I don't even know whether you're supposed to be able to allow to switch Mind Sliver or not with another cantrip. But regardless, I mean, it just works really nicely with our concept. And it's a good spell. And we're just going to have a ton of cantrips on this character by the time we're done. But this is a nice addition. Something we'll probably cast quite a bit. We'll also keep Dissonant Whispers. This is a pretty good spell. Uses the target's reaction, does some damage, moves them out of position, often provokes opportunity attacks from our allies, and it doesn't use their concentration. This is just going to be one of the many cases where our enemies have a bad trip, man. We're keeping Calm Emotions. I mean, I had to keep Calm Emotions, right? Also, perfectly solid spell. So, Calm Emotions is an area of effect that suppresses both the charmed and frightened condition. These are pretty common conditions, so this is a nice defensive spell that gets our party, back in fighting shape. We're also going to keep Sending. Honestly, I would have been fine switching Sending out, but 3rd level spells is just where enchantment and divination schools do not give us a lot of options. And that's it. We're swapping out all the rest. Also at 1st level, we get Telepathic Speech, so lots of forms of telepathy in D&D. This particular one has the advantage that once you set it up, you have a really long range. But it's one of those telepathies that doesn't allow you to communicate with someone you don't share a language with. But overall, it's okay. Then at level 2, we'll get Font of Magic. Since we're going straight sorcerer from now on, we'll have a decent amount of sorcery points. And remember, we can switch them out for spell slots or convert slots into more sorcery points. We're actually going to have a very good reason not to convert sorcery points into spell slots that we'll be going over later. At 3rd level, we're going to get Meta Magic. We will get 2 options right at level 3 in Sorcerer, and then the 3rd option comes at level 10. So I am picking up Twin Spell. This works really nicely with a spell that's only available to Aberrant Mind Sorcerers. Then Careful Spell. This allows us to spend 1 sorcery point and our allies make their saving throw against our spells. Now, if you're casting something like Fireball, then Careful Spell isn't that great because your allies will still take damage from that Fireball even if they make their saving throw. But there are a number of spells this character will have where this is going to work quite nicely. I actually picked up Distance Spell for the final option. This is actually fairly useful. You can give a touch spell a range of 30 feet or double the range of any ranged spell. I usually grab Subtle Spell with my sorcerers so I can cast without verbal or somatic components, but Aberrant Minds actually have a pretty strong alternative to that, so I figure we probably can do without it here. So at level 4 in Sorcerer, we get our first ability score increase. Clearly, at this point, we should protect our concentration. Doubly so, since we didn't start with Constitution saving throw proficiency. I picked up Warcaster, which will not only protect our concentration, but is also very useful for casters that wear a shield like we do. And it provides that nice ability to cast a spell instead of making an opportunity attack. If you use the optional class features from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, at level 5 we'll get Magical Guidance, which allows re-rolling a failed ability check by expending a sorcery point. So if we cast Counterspell, this is an insurance policy if we're countering a spell of a higher level than the slot we use for a counterspell. For this particular character, that will probably be the main use of this feature. The 2 level 6 subclass features that Aberrant Minds get are particularly tasty. First, we get Psionic Sorcery. This feature is the main reason I didn't bother with Subtle Spell for this character. This feature allows us to cast any of the spells granted by our Psionic Spells feature, either by expending a spell slot as normal, or a number of sorcery points equal to the spell's level. And when we do so, the spell has no verbal component, no somatic component, and unless there's a costly material component, we don't need that either. Meaning casting a spell this way is superior Subtle Spell to Subtle Spell itself. Literally, there is no reason not to cast any of our Psionic spells this way from now on. Also, rather than ever convert sorcery points into spell slots with Font of Magic, as long as the spell we want to cast is a Psionic spell, this straight conversion is straight out cheaper. So it's always going to be the superior option to using Font of Magic to get the spell slots for these spells. Thematically also, I think this is a really nice fit. These aren't regular spells our character's casting. These are effects from Chommy Tong's altered state of mind thanks to his unusual plants and fungi. Which is where our other level 6 subclass feature also I think really fits. Resistance to psychic damage and advantage on saving throws against being charmed or frightened. We're mellow and chill. Total relaxation, dude. At 8th level, we get another ability score improvement, and it is time to get Constitution saving throw proficiency with Resilient Constitution. Now, all that debt we built up by starting Cleric, it's paid in full. And finally, at 12th level, we get our final ability score improvement. And we had a nice little trip and came across the Green Fairy, and her touch brought us a magical gift. Fey Touch provides the Misty Step spell, which we can cast for free once per long rest, and can continue to cast, if needed, using spell slots. The same goes for our first level spell selection. I pretty much give this same spiel every time I take this on a build, but if you're playing with Strixhaven campaign-specific material, then Silvery Barbs is a great selection here. If you're playing with Wildmount setting-specific material, Gift of Alacrity is a great choice. Otherwise, Command is a strong option. No concentration, great upcasting, and a creature that fails its saving throw is basically giving up their next turn to perform your command. And once the command is complete, they end their turn. So that is all our class and subclass features. Let's get into the meat of the build, spell selection. First, as I mentioned, we're switching out most of our Psionic spells. I want to go through those first. So level 1 spells. I don't really like Arms of Hadar, and it doesn't fit the build concept anyways. But Tasha's Hideous Laughter, now that fits perfectly. With a little taste of our special smoke, and they're laughing and they don't even know why. Also, this is a really nice spell for a sorcerer to get. It's not on the sorcerer spell list, but it's just a fantastic option for a twinned spell. Just 1 sorcery point to twin this for twice the effect. A great use of a sorcery point. With our level 2 spells, Detect Thoughts is being replaced with Tasha's Mind Whip. Intelligence saving throw, which is great, does psychic damage, and it forces the target to choose whether to move, take their action, or bonus action on their turn. Finally, they lose their reaction. Very solid, and also a great upcast, hitting 1 additional target for each spell slot level. Now, level 3 is tough. The Aberrant Mind gives a very small list of possible replacement options, but I don't like Hunger of Hadar for this build, so I am grabbing Clairvoyance instead. There is definitely some utility use, and it's not a bad spell. Okay, level 4, I made some tough decisions. Largely because I actually like both the base spells given, but I thought we could do better conceptually and still pick strong spells. First, Summon Aberration is being replaced with Rowlathim's Psychic Lance. This has some advantages that mirror Tasha's Mind Whip, like Intelligence Saving Throw and doing psychic damage. Where this is worth a higher level slot is the effect if it sticks. This incapacitates the target. That means they can't take actions of any type at all. Furthermore, if they were concentrating on a spell, that concentration is lost. Particularly against spellcasters, you'll see the enhanced effect over Tasha's Mind Whip. And this was a really tough one, but Ever's Black Tentacles, which is a really good spell, I didn't think it fit thematically, so I have replaced it with Confusion. Confusion, I think, is super thematic and is a solid spell. Where I really like Confusion is if we're facing creatures that might have fear and or charm immunities, well, Confusion doesn't care. The targets lose their reactions, and on their turn, they'll likely do nothing even remotely useful. Finally, with our 5th level Psionic Spells, Rary's Telepathic Bond, which is a solid spell for ritual casters, which we are not, is replaced with Synaptic Static. Super thematic and a solid spell. Once again, we're targeting intelligence, we do a decent amount of psychic damage, and there is a lingering effect that subtracts a d6 from attack rolls and concentration saving throws. This is solid debuffing, and it lingers and doesn't use our concentration, and that makes it really unique and makes this a strong spell. And another tough decision. I just really wanted Modify Memory on this build. I think it's a pretty good utility spell and thematic, but we give up Telekinesis to get it? That is tough. And if you're playing this build and you decide, hey, there is no way I'm giving up Telekinesis, then I get it. But on my version, Modify Memory, it was just too perfect not to grab. So here is the final list of Psionic Spells. I think we've got a flavorful list here that is in line with our concept, and we have some great options for Psionic spellcasting. Okay, so that's our Psionic Spells. Let's get into the regular spells. We already have a good list of cantrips. Mind Sliver for sure I see us using regularly, but we'll add Acid Splash, get it? Crate Bonfire, Firebolt, Mage Hand, Minor Illusion, and Prestidigitation. I'm pretty happy with that list. Then with the first level spells. So a couple things here that are not creative. Sorcerers just have some must-haves, so I took those. We've got Absorb Elements. It's going to help protect us using our reaction. And speaking of protecting us using our reaction, of course, we'll take the Shield spell. We're going to take one luxury first level spell though, and that is Fog Cloud, because, right? So what Fog Cloud effectively does is it makes it so nobody without blind sight can see. Even True Sight does not pierce a Fog Cloud. Normally this just makes every attack straight up, because you're applying both advantage and disadvantage to every attack. So this is an effective way to turn off things like Pack Tactics, for example. It's also a pretty effective way to deal with creatures that need to see their targets, which is a lot of spellcasters and creatures like Beholders, that kind of thing. Also useful when fighting creatures with petrification features, like Medusas. We're only going to hang on to one second level spell, and that is Web. Like I said, there are some must-have sorcerer spells. This is just a strong area of effect at a low second level spell slot. Creatures caught have to use their action to attempt to escape, and it's possible to catch opponents in Web multiple times if they do escape. Another must-have spell. So we're on to level 3 spells, and the standard, of course, will take Counterspell. We are a sorcerer, we'll take Counterspell. You take Counterspell with sorcerers, and that's just about it. However, I have a couple spells here that I think are conceptually appropriate. First, look at the pretty lights. Hypnotic Pattern I thought was appropriate. Incapacitates a number of enemies, and there's no additional saving throw after the first. Super powerful against groups of enemies unless they have immunity to the charmed condition, in which case you want to cast Confusion instead. Hypnotic Pattern and Confusion are both great candidates for Careful Spell, by the way, as they allow any allies caught in the area to automatically make their saving throw. And unlike spells like Fireball, which this build doesn't have, if they make their saving throw, nothing happens. Okay, so Stinking Cloud. When I first came up with this concept to the build challenge, the very first thing I thought of was not Aberrant Mind Sorcerer, it was not Peace Cleric, it was Stinking Cloud. Whatever I made, I had to check, does it get Stinking Cloud? Because if it doesn't, it's not on the list. And I think it's pretty obvious why. However, Stinking Cloud is a spell that normally doesn't make my builds because optimally, I think there are better options. But if you're playing this concept, then of course you want to cast this spell. So let's take a little bit more time here to discuss how you make the most out of this. So let's read it through. It's 1 action to cast, range of 90 feet, creates a 20-foot radius spherical cloud, has verbal, somatic, and material components. I expect most DMs would allow the thematically appropriate material component. You know, our Spiff, Fatty, Hogger, Blunt, Jimmy, Roach, Zoot, and a biggie at that. So first, we get the effects of a fog cloud. Spreads around corners and obscures vision. But with Stinking Cloud, each creature that is in the cloud at the start of their turn makes a Constitution saving throw, and if they fail, they lose their action. What they don't lose, however, is their movement, which means in most cases, they can move out of the cloud, and basically, they lose 1 turn on a failed saving throw, and they don't even lose that if they made a successful one. And that's not great for a 3rd level spell. However, it can be very effective in the right circumstances. Because it's easy to say, well, they can just leave the cloud. But what if that's not such a great thing? Now, I can't give you every example, but I can give you some examples. Like, what if the enemy is taking pot shots from cover and then just ducking back behind the cover after firing? What if leaving the cloud provokes opportunity attacks from allies with blind fighting that you protected with careful spell metamagic? What if they're on a ledge? What if you open a door, fill the room with a stinking cloud, and they're forced into a bottleneck? Especially, if you threw some caltrops down before you open the door, you rascal. Maybe we're going to double up with another caster, and we'll cast a stinking cloud, and they'll throw a web in the middle or something. I mean, I can't possibly list all the circumstances when leaving the cloud will be either inconvenient, impossible, or even deadly. But that is what we want to look for. And when those circumstances come up, then Stinking Cloud can be a pretty effective spell. But not just against any opponent. Keep in mind if they're immune to poison, and a lot of creatures are, or they don't need to breathe, then they automatically make their saving throw. I should also mention that if a creature does leave the cloud, if you have forced movement options in your group, it might be worthwhile to push them right back in. So that's Stinking Cloud. Let's move on. 4th level spells, Dimension Door. I mean, it is just handy to have a teleport that doesn't require line of sight. Keep in mind, though, as a halfling, if we want to bring along a passenger, they need to be small size as well, or smaller. 5th level spells, Wall of Stone. It's just a really nice spell. Walls are super useful, and this is the one that's available to sorcerers. This is not a thematic choice, but it is a mechanical choice. But you know what? We'll take a thematic 5th level spell as well. Big B's Hand. Look at my hand. That's so weird. Whoa. Yeah, my hand is Big B's Hand. Grapples, pushes, and does damage. Mechanically, basically, when you're a wizard or a sorcerer, most of the things you do are kind of specialized for dealing with groups of enemies. Especially once we move beyond, the 1st and 2nd level spells. That is true for us too. Synaptic Static, Hypnotic Pattern, Stinking Cloud, Confusion. But Big B's Hand is a high-level concentration option that is very effective against single enemies. If you're not sure what to do with it, using Grasping Hand to grapple and then using your bonus action to crush is kind of the go-to option. Finally, my 6th level spell options. Scatter, it's just a really nice spell, and it resets the chessboard the way that you want it to look. I don't have a whole lot more to say about that. It is a high-cost spell with a high reward. Look at the battlefield. If people are caught in places you don't want them to be, that's when you want to consider Scatter. And finally, Mass Suggestion. Now, I take this on builds all the time. But, if anyone is making targets more susceptible to suggestion, it's our special plants and fungi. With this special smoke and, hey dudes, we should totally take off all our clothes and jump in the lake. But this is the final character sheet, and a link to this character sheet is available in the video description if you want to check out the details. And that is Chommy Tong. So how did I do? Do you think I met the challenge of the build as well as delivered an optimized character? I think I did. Let me know in the comments below, as well as any conceptual builds you think would have matched this challenge. Otherwise, until next time, I am going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.